Yep. All right. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to Now That's Debatable. As you can see, I'm still producing, so it
Yep,
doesn't seem
yep.
as smooth.
All right.
My fault. James, man, thanks for joining us, man.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity. I actually don't know a ton about Project 2025, so I went and looked up some stuff over the weekend while I was traveling. But thanks again for the opportunity to be on.
Yeah, man. So, could you tell us the like just like what are you doing, like the voluntary work or the political work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I work for the Standing for Freedom Center at Liberty University. We are a think tank that deals very exclusively with a faith based approach to civic engagement, constitutional issues, and we're unique and kind of distinct from other conservative, think tanks that are out there, and that we have a very specifically biblical worldview, Christian approach to a lot of these issues. We want to encourage Christians getting involved in politics. And other think tanks who hold views that we would have in common, that Christians might have in common with other groups like Jews and others who share some of those same Judeo-Christian values. We were originally referred to as the Falkirk Center and went through a lot of rebrands. Obviously, since we're connected with Liberty University, we do not endorse any political parties or candidates. I'm obviously very outspoken about my views, but as an organization, we don't specifically endorse any political parties or candidates.
Gotcha. So, how does Falk the you said I know it used to be called the Falkirks or this Falkirks and now it's called the Freedom and something else. What is it called?
Standing for Freedom
Center
Center.
for Freedom Center. All right. So, like, do they endorse the Project 2025
No,
document?
absolutely not.
Okay.
Yeah, want to be clear about that.
Gotcha. How do you feel about it?
So there are some things that I like in Project 2025, and there are some things that I
Okay.
think will never get implemented, even
Gotcha.
if
How
former
do you
President
feel
Trump were
about
to
it?
win a second term this year. Um, as it stands, I think he's a slight underdog, but 90 days in politics is like 3 years, as I'm sure you guys know, and a lot could change. But some of the proposals in Project 2025 that I don't think will fly. And again, this is my own personal opinion. Views reflect my own point of view, not reflective of any organization that I'm affiliated with. Like, for example, bringing the FBI under the under the control of the executive branch. I don't think that'll happen. I don't think the Republican Party and Trump will get behind it. Other proposals that Project 2025 has gotten behind, like finishing Trump's proposed border wall, and kind of building upon the Schedule F executive order,
Mm-hmm.
which which Trump did do during his term, kind of making that more permanent to where he would have more control over the hiring and firing of federal agents. Because my personal opinion, I think that the president should have the right to appoint people who reflect their ideology, whether Democrat or Republican. I think that they have the right to have political appointees in different departments, whether it be the DOJ, whether it be the Department of Education, that reflect their political roles and priorities. I'm not a fan of any administration having people working from them who, I mean, you can have people within your administration that don't agree with you. I think that can be good, but when it gets to the point where they're, um, kind of leaking to the media and undermining, your agenda, I think that each administration should have the right to pick people who reflect their priorities. There's also there's talk about getting rid of the Department of Education in Project 2025. I don't think that will happen. I don't think Republicans will implement it. Go ahead.
What do you like support about the document? Like, for instance, like I was looking through it, and there's a one paragraph in there. It talks about the Sabbath, and like I have the actual document pulled up, and this is what it says. It says God ordained the Sabbath as a rest, as a day of rest, and until very recently, the Judeo-Christian tradition sought to honor that mandate by moral and legal regulation of work on that day. Moreover, a shared day off makes it possible for families and communities to enjoy time off together, rather than as atomized individuals and provides a healthier cadence of life for everyone. And then here's the policy position. It says Congress should encourage communal rest by amending the Fair Labor Standards Act to require that workers be paid time and a half for hours worked on the Sabbath. Now, because when I look at the Heritage Foundation, to me, it come across hypocritical here because they talk about more like government should be hands off, especially on economical matters. And I look at something like this. This definitely isn't hands off. This is big government stepping in the name of religion to control how they manage their employees. Like, what do you think about this part?
Yeah, so I actually support not a forced day off on Sunday, but if companies want to offer that to employees and they want to provide that time and a half, they should absolutely be able to do that. I think
Sure.
that could be a good thing. In terms of forcing every single company to do that, no, I don't support that.
Okay.
But I will say that the particularly the philosophy of J.D. Vance, who's Trump's vice presidential pick, there is more of a role for more government intervention. This is kind of the new right philosophy, where the old GOP was more of a completely hands-off approach, whereas the kind of new philosophy, there is more of a role for government intervention, particularly on trade issues, economic issues, and other issues. So I'm actually okay with more government intervention depending on the context.
Gotcha. Like, what about this context? Because you said you'd be okay with, businesses paying their employees time and a half on a Sabbath. Like, they can do that now. As far as I'm aware, there's no law preventing them from doing that. But this seems to be like a mandate. They want to change federal law to require employees to be paid time and a half for the Sabbath. Like, and are they going to do this for other religions as well? That was rhetorical. Obviously not, right? This is a very Christian document, but like, what do you agree with this position here?
I agree with elements of it. I wouldn't go as far as to say that it should be mandated, but I would go as far to say there should be some incentive for businesses who want to apply it,
Really?
and kind of have that opportunity. Yeah, but again, it wouldn't be blanket for everybody.
What do you think about the way that it handles abortion? So I was reading it, and it seems to conflate some things that aren't abortion with abortion. Like, it talks about the week after pill, which is I had never heard of that term. I know what the morning after pill is, but they mentioned the week after pill. I had never heard of that term until reading that document. But like, it's a pill you can take, about 72 hours after having unprotected sex, and it has stopped the implantation of the what's it called? The
embryo into the uterine wall.
Yes, for fertilized embryo. Yeah. Well, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, certainly I think there should be modifications, and there should be a separate discussion about the validity of that particular issue. Certainly I'm in favor of abortion pill restrictions. I know that's probably a very unpopular position, but I think that there should be a separate debate and a separate conversation about the pill you just mentioned, and it shouldn't be lumped in together with overall abortion access.
How about the way is this something that we want government involved in? Like, do you think taking a week after pill, do you think that constitutes an abortion?
No.
Okay. So would you consider it murder or any sort of homicide in any way?
Yeah, so this is where my Christian worldview comes into play. I feel like there's more to it than just the government should be staying out of people's lives. I feel like there is and again, people who don't ascribe to the Christian worldview are going to come to a different conclusion, and I totally respect that. I think that there is a biblical role for protecting life, for the government to protect life at all stages. And I do think it should not just be about unborn life, but it should be about protecting all stages of life. But I do think that there is a role for the government to restrain evil and to promote good, and I do believe that part of that.
Do you think taking the week after pill is evil?
I don't, but it would depend on the circumstance. I will just be honest. I'm not super familiar with the week after pill.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't looked into it a lot, so I will have to look into that a bit more. But my initial reaction to what you're saying is that it's not the same thing as an abortion. There would need to be, and no, it would be depending on the circumstance. Would be my answer as to whether or not this evil. If it's actually terminating a life. That's after conception, I would say yes, but if it's not terminating,
it's doing that. So, but what's odd is that, so, I mean, it's terminating a life, but I mean, when a woman goes through her regular menstrual cycle, a life is terminated, right? Because we're talking about living cells here. So,
right,
I mean, the teenager who does porn and does watch porn and shoots one in the toilet, that's terminating a life as well, because it's alive. These are living cells that are going to die. So, but I don't know. I'm trying to figure out. I guess I'm trying to figure out like where would you draw the line here? So like it's an egg that's been fertilized by the sperm, but it's trying to implant on a uterine wall, and that's what this pill prevents. And it seems like they think this is tantamount to abortion. I don't want to put their words in your mouth, but I was just curious about your position here.
Yeah, I would say that once the egg is fertilized, and once the embryo has been officially conceived, I would say from that point onward, I think it's more abortion is morally wrong from that point onward. There's kind of a separation between what I believe ideologically and what is possible.
Mm-hmm.
I am for full abortion abolition, but I think politically, I would not be in favor of a full national abortion ban at conception as of right now.
Mm-hmm.
I would be more in favor of curtailing abortion pill access and something like a 6 to 15 week restriction, because I think that at 12 to 15 weeks is when an infant can feel pain. And so at that point, I would strongly be in favor of an abortion ban. And depending on the state's politics, like Florida, strongly Republican state, there's more than 1 million registered Republicans than Democrats in Florida. So I think politically, the 6-week abortion ban was the right move in Florida. In a state like Arizona, that is more of a swing state, maybe different. But if the pill were to terminate a life after conception, then yes, I'd be totally 100% against it. I want to go back and clarify my position a little bit.
That's what the pill is doing. So this is a egg cell that has been fertilized by the sperm.
Okay, yeah, I do 100% clarify. I'd be against that in practice, but politically, don't think it would be possible to ban that at this time.
Okay, so and I guess on this point, you would support Project 2025's position.
Yes, on most positions, I would support them. The only one that I think, or there's probably more than one, but the one that stood out to me as I was reading the Washington Post article, kind of summarizing what some of their points are, is bringing the FBI under the direct control of the president. That might be a little bit too far for me, because then you kind of have to look at it. Well, what if the shoe were on the other foot, and what if it were under a Democratic administration? Could they use and weaponize the FBI for something that would be un-American? I think that's a good point worth discussing. So I'm not giving Project 2025 a blanket endorsement, but I generally am supportive of the people who are involved in it, and I'm familiar with some of their perspectives, and for sure.
Gotcha. When I was looking through it, and I didn't get a chance to read all of it or even close to it. Man, I think this document is like 950. It's almost 1,000 pages long.
It's insane.
And so, yeah, I was trying to get through all of it, but some of it as much as I could. I was kind of just using the search feature, but like it kind of the overall message. If from what I've read, if there was just some thesis statement, it would seem like it was like just the destruction of any sort of separation between religion and government. Like, do you agree with that? Maybe not the thesis statement, but do you not see like how that's happening here? Like even from the one of the first prongs I read about the Sabbath.
So I actually did a relatively involved presentation on separation of church and state. Do you want me to respond to your first question, or can I kind of talk about that and give context?
Sure, go ahead. Go, however you want to.
Yeah, awesome. So I did a presentation at Liberty University, this at their School of Government Public Policy Conference. They do it every April. And in the presentation, I discussed some additional perspectives that people may not be aware of about what the founders' true intention regarding separation of church and state. Mm-hmm. And in that same 1802 letter to the Danbury Baptists, where Thomas Jefferson said that the American people had set up a wall between separation of church and state through the adoption of the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clauses. Mm-hmm. I'll just briefly paraphrase the real quick. Establishment Clause basically says Congress shall not pass a law establishing a church or respecting the establishment of any religion. Mm-hmm. And then the Free Exercise Clause basically says that government shall make no law abridging the free exercise of, or the press, or, et cetera, freedom of assembly. But in that same letter, Thomas Jefferson wrote that believing with you that religion is a matter which solely lies between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship. And so because that's in the same letter that he wrote the line that's been written to reflect separation of church and state. To me, that also implies that religion is a private, personal matter, and the state is not to get involved either way. It's not to establish the American government cannot establish Christianity as a national religion, but it also cannot prevent people from practicing beliefs and values that are affiliated with Christianity or Islam or Judaism in the public square. And a couple of other interesting legal analysts in U.S. history, like former Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story, mm-hmm. observed that the U.S. colonies, the American colonies from its foundation down to the Revolution, did openly, by the force of its laws and institutions, support and sustain in some form the Christian religion, and almost invariably gave a peculiar sanction to some of its fundamental doctrines. I have a few pages of notes I'm reading from. Just can't remember every single quote.
I agree with you. I got Joseph Story's commentary on the Constitution on my shelf, by the way. But go ahead.
Awesome. Another Supreme Court Justice, David Brewer, who was involved in a case, mm-hmm. which I believe was the United States versus Church of the Holy Trinity, where he argued that the U.S. is a Christian nation, not in terms of Christianity as the official religion of the land, but that the foundational truths of the Christian religion were the principal cause of the settlement of the American colonies. It's a little bit paraphrased, has been identified with the growth and development of those. Yeah, I'm sure. And development of those settlements into the United States of America. But go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just saying, like, I disagree with him that Christianity was the foundational cause. For matter of fact, like, this would be like a whole nother episode.
Sure.
I would think, I think the Bible goes contrary to the principles that the American colonists were fighting for, along with the abolitionists, mm-hmm. along with the civil rights groups, all of them. I think the Bible goes contrary to them on that. But from what I read, the Bible seems to be pretty pro-tyranny. But I guess back to what you were saying. So, like, I guess your position is that maybe the founders didn't want a true separation between religion and government. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I feel like they did not want Christianity or Judaism to ever be the established religion of the United States, but that they were totally fine with some manner of religious influence where certain concepts like serving others and, respect for the rule of law.
Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, if someone thinks that, their religion requires them to respect the rule of law or to treat other people equally, and that happens to coincide with any principle we found in the Constitution, I'm all for that. But so, like, they seem to be going way further than this. Like, they're talking about the Sabbath specifically, Sunday, mm-hmm. right? And not even a Saturday, Sunday, which is strictly Christian. You don't think they're completely, I mean, I wouldn't even say they're blurring the lines here. Like, I'd say they just completely took a sledgehammer to the wall, knocked it down, and say, hey, it's Christian now. Government's Christian, pretty much. Like, because, like, obviously I don't see any preference for any other religion here.
Yeah, and again, there's kind of a little bit of a differentiation between what I believe in terms of ideology and in terms of what I think would be possible politically. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, so you had appealed to the founding fathers, and should their opinion really matter that much for how we want to run government now?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think one bad opinion, like believing that they had the right to own slaves, immediately disqualifies all their other opinions.
Oh, no. Well, yeah, I don't think that's what disqualifies it. I think the fact that they no longer take part in the system, I'm not sure why we should care what they wanted. Like, perhaps one of them may have wanted a theocracy. I don't see why we should appeal to them, especially if they're no longer taking part in, our society because they're dead, obviously, right? I don't see why we should care what they think in this matter.
Well, I think because the Constitution has proven to be such a durable document, it's withstood a lot of challenges over the years. I feel like the founders may not have been right about everything, but the principles they advocated for, and again, we all come from different worldviews, have different opinions, but I feel like a lot of the beliefs and values and perspectives they held were timeless, and they have withstood the test of time. And for that reason, even though the founders are no longer taking part in the system, they were wrong about slavery, very much so. I do feel like the principles they advocated for are things that are good for America, and kind of like some Republicans who have waged successful campaigns in blue states, like Governor Youngkin, for example. He took that approach to where he said we should learn from history, both the good and the bad. And I think the same thing is true in this case as well.
Gotcha. So would you say that we should be appealing to, I guess, to what the opinions of the founding fathers, like you had mentioned, like Thomas Jefferson specifically, and like what I wanted to say about him was like how he wasn't even in the country when the Constitution was written. So I guess I want to walk back on when I had said earlier that they none of the founding fathers' opinions should matter because they're dead. Well, it should matter to the extent that if they're writing the document, then obviously their intent would have ought to have some sort of impact on the way we interpret it. But I mean, if like someone like Thomas Jefferson, who may have not exactly wanted religion totally out of government, like, should that even matter to us?
I think it should, because again, the things that they advocated for, a lot of them are connected to principles that have stood the test of time. And I think that the role of religion in the public square has made America a better nation than if it didn't have any religious influence at all. I think it's given us a deeper, and we have a lot of problems as a nation, to be clear, but I think it's in some ways it's given us a better respect for life. It's given us a better understanding for the role of the family. And again, I know we all come from different worldviews. A lot of people don't believe in the nuclear family anymore, but I do. I believe in that. But I think that their values ultimately were, and again, we might not agree on this particular point, but I think that the fact that they borrowed so much from the Judeo-Christian perspective is a huge part of what made this country great, particularly when it comes to the doctrine of inalienable rights. I'm just going to describe this real quick, where in the Declaration of Independence, the founding fathers basically acknowledged that it's, and not just in the Declaration, but in other founding documents, that it is the government's job not to add or to take away from our rights, but to secure them, that we have human rights that are given to us by God. And there might not be as much agreement on the point of those rights coming from God, but it's the government's job to secure those rights, not to add or take that away. And I think that perspective is a perspective that was heavily borrowed from the Judeo-Christian religion in some way.
Okay, this might pivot from Project 25 a little bit, but I think it may be interesting to talk about that. Like, because you're talking about how government securing people's rights, and that's pulling from Judeo Christianity. Um, what specifically about Christianity do you think we get the idea that government ought to protect our rights? So, like, is there a passage that you would point to? Cause I'll tell you where I'm coming from. So, like, I remember, like, when did you attend Liberty's like School of Public Policy? There, what's it called, the Helm School of Government?
Ironically, I actually did not. I was
Okay,
more of an interdisciplinary in undergrad and stratcoms in grad school.
gotcha. Okay, so yeah, like, so I did my first master's there at the Helm School of Government there, and I was doing my did it in public policy. And one of the problems I was running into was that, and I had this idea of how I thought government ought to function, very limited, and mainly just securing people's rights. And as I looked throughout the Bible, I wasn't really seeing that. What I was seeing from the way I would see government operate in the Bible, it was very oppressive. It wasn't you familiar with Mosaic law and how the government was structured? Like it was pretty much an apartheid state, right? There was special rules depending on who you are, right? If you were an Israelite, you couldn't be slave permanently. It was only for 6 years. If you were not an Israelite, you were a slave indefinitely. But that only applied to the Hebrew men. The way land was owned, you couldn't own land permanently if you were a non-Hebrew, because after 6 years it'd be given back over to the family court and to the bloodline. Like there was so many problems. I didn't see it securing people's rights. Is there a passage in particular, or maybe some principle that you can extrapolate that you
Sure.
think applies?
Do you mind if I pull up Romans 13 real quick?
Sure.
Yeah, for me, this is the go-to passage whenever talk about sure biblical role and government. Do you mind if I pull up Romans? So the beginning didn't have any religious one, it says, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities."
I remember, like,
For there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. And then going down to verse 4, for the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid for rulers that for be afraid for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They're God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. And so then it goes on to say in verse 6, this is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to govern and give to everyone what you owe them. Mm-hmm. If you owe taxes, pay tax, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. So for me, when it talks about government exists to reward those who are doing good and punish those who are doing evil, for me, part of that is securing those rights as a way of giving the righteous, and when I say righteous, I'm not only talking about people who are in Christ. Obviously, that's the biblical standard of righteousness, but people who want to do good, people who want to be a good human, be community leader, protect those who in their neighborhood, support their family, go out and fulfill them. But be a good person.
It seems like your idea of what's evil, Aaron, and what's good, it doesn't seem to match with the way the Bible treats government. For instance, considering the way the textbooks that I was reading when I was going through the grad school, textbook I was reading, the way it presented biblical government. If I had never read the Bible, I would have never guessed that it would endorse something like slavery. I would have never thought it would say something like, you may purchase your slaves from the heathen among you, which is exactly what the Portuguese was doing, and then bringing them back over here, and they sell them to the English, all that kind of stuff, right? So it seems like endorse things like that. So how do you know what you're calling evil is what's being talked about here in Romans 13? Because it doesn't. I don't think it match.
Well, I think that God has given us natural law. He's laid his, even for people who are unsaved or who are not professing believers. There's common grace and there's special grace. There's special grace, which is revealed only through Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's common grace. And I think that part of that is natural law, where we know that it's wrong to murder. It's wrong to abuse and take advantage of other people. And for me, and also I would argue from the Bible, that did not come about through chance. It talks about in Romans 1 how God's law was revealed on the hearts and minds. And so for me, that's natural law.
Well, what about in instances where God seems to be violating natural law? Like with the slavery thing, I don't want to keep beating a dead horse, keep bringing it back here, but like, is it something easy to point out, or even a way, like, you're familiar with like just war theory, and like, right, with like different theories about how war ought to be waged. There are certain things that are immoral and certain things that are not, right? And I know of no like just moral theorist that would ever say something like genocide, like that's on the table, and that's something that was resorted to often throughout scripture. As a matter of fact, Saul was punished. He was removed from being king because he didn't resort to genocide. Like, the instances like that kind of contradict natural law. So even the Christian God doesn't seem to follow the natural law that you claim put in our hearts.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of parts in the Bible that are way R-rated and are difficult to process sometimes. And I think a lot of the Old Testament passages are difficult to process, but a lot of it was just involved in clearing the path for his chosen people, Israel, and how everything that happened was a result of a bigger and greater plan that ultimately led to the salvation for, according to Christian doctrine, the salvation of the world through Christ.
Sure, but in the government in that instance, it wasn't securing people's rights, was it?
In that instance, it was securing the future for God's chosen people. But I think that there is a way in which the Old Testament, which is a lot harsher in some respects than the New Testament, cleared the way for the worldview that I feel strongly about in terms of securing people's rights.
So can I shift gears here just a minute? Just kind of went down a different road if possible.
Sure.
So we're talking about how we essentially the government securing your rights. But from some of the things that I've been reading in Project 2025 and some of the videos I've seen regarding Project 2025, it seems like there are things that are undoubtedly going to become more restrictive. One of those things, and something that, since you mentioned the Old Testament and some of the passages that are found and a little harder to deal with, is pornography and the abolishment and or making illegal thereof. Do you support Project 2025 and the concept or the idea of making pornography illegal?
I do support creating any cultural incentive possible for people to no longer view pornography. Like I'm personally against it, but I don't know how you would implement a legal ban on pornography in terms of, would I be in favor of that from a moral perspective? Yes, but am I in favor of a political perspective? I don't know how you would enforce that. It seems like that would potentially be, how would you ever, be able to have that much control over, because
that's the same way that's part of the problem. You're talking about giving the government more control to make this change happen if possible. And then B, they already, kind of started this back with book burnings. That was the first concept and idea of eradicating information that people you didn't want people to have. And, you have things like George Orwell, 1984, where you have a government, hypothetical dystopian government that's taking information they don't want people to see, correcting it, putting out new information, and then burning the old information retroactively. It seems that that's the opposite of giving people back rights. It seems that that's taking human rights away, because you're taking away literally a freedom of speech. You're taking the First Amendment and you're saying there are things that we won't allow you to do, and then potentially you're taking away like bodily autonomy by saying there are things we don't want you doing with your own body. Why do you think the government should have a right to say what I can do with my body and my time?
Well, if it's about abortion, I feel like the government has an invested interest in protecting life.
Well, I mean,
And
we're
again,
sticking to pornography here. We're just talking about like what stops me from masturbating on my own time. Like, I know that seems like a weird and upfront question, but like, why does the government get to say what I'm going to do with my body? Why does the government get to dictate what I'm going to do with my spare time and or the materials that I want to look at, or the reading that I want to comprehend? It seems that where you're on one hand or on one cheek saying that we have this, we want to back off government, and then on the other hand you have them interfering in things like women's right and the right of choice and abolishment of pornography and or making it illegal, and forcing policy workers to pay overtime on the Sabbath day. It seems like on one side we're using the government to push this conservative right-wing agenda, and on the other side we're trying to pull the government away from saying you're not allowed to do this. Abolishment of pornography
as I
and or
mentioned
making
earlier,
it illegal.
I do think there is a place for more government intervention. I think the pornography example creates a lot of issues because I'm also in favor of limiting the power of big tech and corporations and government access to information and other things. So I think practically a ban on pornography would coincide with other positions that I have on other issues. And I think practically making that happen would be so difficult that I don't know that it would be politically feasible. Like, for example, the TikTok ban. I think that that's something that presents a lot of issues, and that's something you had both Democrats and Republicans sign on to. But I think that there is a role on some issues for government intervention, for potentially overturning Section 230 of the Federal Communications Act, or maybe that wasn't the correct act that I'm referring to, but breaking up some of these big monopolies. Google was just in a case, an antitrust case that they had ruled against. But I'm not kind of a traditional conservative in that government hands off and everything. I actually do believe that there's a role for government intervention. People say the government, can't define morality. I think it can in some cases when it comes to building a society where people's rights are protected and honored.
But to clarify, you would only support that in a government that also coincides with Christianity. Am I wrong?
That coincides with the values that are connected to Christianity. You can still hold to a lot of Christian values and still not be a Christian. There are a lot of Jewish voters who are pro-life, like Ben Shapiro, for example. I wouldn't necessarily take him as a prime example of a Jew anymore. He's definitely the borderline of Christianity at this point. He definitely holds the values thereof. Yeah, but you can hold to some of those values and still not be a Christian. I feel like Elon Musk is another example. Dave Rubin, who I don't believe is a Christian, he also holds to some of these values, although obviously I would disagree with him on some issues. That's why I refer to it a lot as a Judeo. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, the real question, and I'm not going to backtrack here in just a second if I can, but the real question isn't, can you have these values? Sure. I think in general, being good to other people, the golden rule, if you will, I think that's at least a somewhat, Christian value. But I would say that you can do that without being a Christian. However, it seems that when you're making laws stipulating things specifically based off of or surrounding Christianity, that's a different story. And the other thing I wanted to just kind of, honest, not to go off topic, is just that I'm not necessarily asking when I ask you a question, is it something do you think the government can pull off? I'm more asking your personal opinion of it, and I get you're not speaking on the behalf of an organization. I mean, whether it's whether it's doable or not, or whether it's actually going to happen or not. I don't care. That's not relevant. I'm more interested in your opinion of it. Their opinion,
Awesome.
and you're the person we're talking to, so it's more of a just kind of getting your feet and seeing where you stand on it. So that's just wanted to clarify when I ask questions. I'm not speaking. Just wanted to kind of clarify that.
Yeah, awesome.
You're supportive of the nuclear family? Are you a actual marriage, gay marriage?
Yeah, so I'm obviously in favor of traditional marriage and the nuclear family. I am not a supporter of same-sex marriage. And again, you had asked me what I think was politically feasible, so I'm not to talk about what I think is politically feasible. So I'm not going to go down that road, but I believe that a biblical point of view on that issue leads one to believe that marriage is to be defined between a man and a woman.
And do you think the government should get to dictate that's how a marriage should work, given that you also say that you're for a separation of, church and state?
No, I think the government should stay out of marriage altogether.
Okay. I appreciate that short and very candid answer. That was exactly kind of what I was looking for. Because again, we could talk about possibilities and feasibility of what could, potentially happen, but I think that's a rough road to hoe and a hard path to get to, given so many unknowns of the future.
Absolutely.
One more thing, and then AAA, or if you have questions, or if you want to go somewhere particular with it. But I just had one more, and it was regarding potentially firing people who underwent DEI training for diversity. Are you supportive or against this kind of clause?
No, I'm not in favor of firing people who underwent DEI training. It would have to be on a case-by-case basis. Does that person hold the views that are espoused by the administration? Because so many of us have gone through DEI training of some sort. I've been exposed to DEI concepts in working for different positions. I don't think it would be fair to pursue a blanket ban because a lot of people have been through DEI training and then they've applied it in different ways, right? Not everyone has gone in a more ultra progressive route with DEI that would potentially be incompatible with staffing and choices in a Trump-Vance administration. I just feel like that the president should have the authority to keep appointees and hiring decisions who are aligned with their political perspectives. But to answer your question, a blanket ban, a blanket firing of people who have been through DEI training, no, I wouldn't be in favor of that.
All right, fair enough. And I said I was going to go, that was going to be my last one, but it's on the same kind of toe of DEI. Do you think that critical race theory poses a genuine threat to people as an educative tool?
I don't think it poses a physical threat, but I do think it poses an ideological threat because it is rooted in what prominent Christian evangelical thinkers like Bodhi Baucham have referred to as cultural Marxism. And I think it rewires people into viewing each other through this false oppressor privileged class, or not classes, dichotomy. And it has the potential to worsen racial tensions in the country instead of making them better. And Bodhi Baucham connects concepts that are connected to critical theory, such as critical race theory, as problematic because it's less about truth and more about power. Who is holding the power? And I see a lot of these identity politics movements, whether they're Black Lives Matter, whether it's elements connected to LGBTQ+, whether it's discussions connected to abortion and feminism. I see a lot of these movements, and again, a lot of them do come from well-intentioned, well-meaning places, or at least the individuals who are participating in them, they all have a reason for being in them. I feel like a lot of them are geared around political power. And so that is why I feel like something like critical race theory would pose not necessarily a physical threat, but an ideological, cultural threat that I believe will worsen race tensions, class tensions, social tensions in the country.
And out of curiosity, since we're on the subject, do you think that it's an incorrect statement or incorrect teaching or education to teach critical race theory? Do you think that's an incorrect theory in general?
I think in the context of a debate and having a discussion, there's a place for discussing the elements of critical race theory in a class that may be looking at the subject specifically. I'm totally in favor of free expression of thought and debate, and respecting one another's ideas. But in terms of having it as the official curriculum of a course that is not explicitly talking about critical race theory, I would absolutely not be in favor of it being taught unless it's somehow connected to that debate context.
So if it were in the context of the antebellum South, in which, it's obviously regarding slavery and slave ownership in America and the 1800s and prior, you don't think that would be a decent lens to look through, or you think it would be a poor lens to look through, or am I misreading that?
I think it would be a poor lens to look through it. I think, again, it would be better to teach U.S. history in terms of the good and the bad, rather than looking at it through the lens of an academic theory. I would prefer people to just teach the facts, teach what happened, why people were wrong, and what we can do as a nation to be better. But I would prefer critical race theory to be solely taught within an academic framework and not as a lens for understanding history.
Okay, and then just one final question on that same topic, and then I'll pause and cede my time, if you will. Have you read the basic thesis for what critical race theory is? And that's not to take a stab at your intellect or education, but I'm just genuinely curious. Have you read the general thesis of what critical race theory is?
Yes, I've read elements and summaries of it. I haven't specifically read, the official thesis of it, but I've seen a lot of analysis and read a lot about it. That all of that has been pulled from the fundamental core summary of what critical race theory is to some degree.
And in a summation of, do you think that framing people that have been culturally or otherwise oppressed throughout history would be an incorrect way to describe what happened in the past?
Would you mind repeating the question briefly? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I said, so you think that, because you said it would be a poor lens to look at, you think that critical race theory being the poor lens, describing people of color or African Americans or even Native Americans as being culturally and otherwise oppressed in history is a poor lens to examine history through?
I think there's nuance there. I do think that African Americans and other disadvantaged groups have been oppressed, but I think that it's not a strict dichotomy between oppressor and privileged, as critical race theory and the 1619 Project, as described by the New York Times. I
thought we had.
Did you have questions, or AAA? Did you want to go over anything or anything?
I was curious about. So, like, I guess my understanding of critical race theory was that. Hold on, did it? I think this person just froze. Like, I guess my issue was that my understanding of critical race theory was that race is like not a trivial factor when it comes to how people were treated throughout history. And I guess I don't know how you could look at, antebellum slavery, and not look at it through those lenses. Because, I mean, the groups were, like, the people that were enslaved, the only reason they were enslaved was literally race-based. You know what I'm saying? I just don't know how else I'd approach that conversation.
Mm-hmm. I just think that there's more to critical race theory than just talking about the oppressor versus oppressed dynamic. And again, I'm speaking as someone who is not super versed in those fields, but I think that a lot of it has just re-engineered society in such a way that we're constantly seeing everything through racism, and we feel that our society is so inundated with racism that it leads us to have a much bleak and pessimistic view on the way things are. And I think in that context, when we're viewing everything in that way, then the applying critical race theory to a history course, for example, that happens to be examining that period, I just feel like for that reason, it's not the best framework.
Well,
But
well, how would you say you teach about the African slave trade, or about the Jim Crow? How would you teach about that without talking about the power dynamic and race?
so I would consider having a Black instructor in the course who could speak to those issues with a little bit more authenticity than a white person would. I think there's definitely a place for selecting in the same way that we select people for different jobs based on their skills. I think there's a place for a class that's taught that's examining some of those issues in Jim Crow and potentially issues during that time period you discussed, the antebellum South. I think that picking, a Black person, African American person to teach that class, I think that, there's a justification for that.
Sure. Okay. Well, I guess I'm not sure why it would have to be I don't know if I would see the benefit in having a Black teacher teaching that subject, but I mean, sure, that'd be fine. Maybe he has some sort of experience he could point to.
Yeah.
But I guess, but how would he teach it? So because I guess we're 'cause when you're talking about not teaching through the lens of critical race theory, I guess what parts are we leaving out? How would I teach that without what is it about critical race theory that you think, I guess, frames the story in some sort of dishonest way? What does it get wrong about slavery specifically, or Jim Crow, either one of those things?
Yeah, so I think it retools our worldview in such a way that creates this class war narrative that Bobby Bacham and others have talked about, to where there's this constant duality between the oppressor and the oppressed, and I think that dichotomy makes racial tensions in America worse, because again, it's geared around power, and so it reorganizes our philosophy around the need for one group to take power at the other's expense. And so how I would personally teach the class would be, I would just want to focus on the facts, and I would want to pull in context regarding those facts from what was going on at the time historically. But I don't think a academic framework like critical race theory is necessary to analyze history, because I think it was created after the events of this time that we're discussing. Yeah, and I think.
No, I mean, not to be rude, but most things that we make up today are after the events that happened, because that's the way time works. We come up with new things all the time. You come up with new documents. In fact, Project 2025, it was started being written in 2023, but it's talking about things that go back as far as the Declaration of Independence and Constitution. You can't just just throw out a document because it's talking about something that happened in the past, or because it's being written in the present. To me, what you're doing, and what I think most people just kind of misunderstand, is critical race theory isn't to say, it's not just about the oppressed versus the oppressors and vice versa. It's really just trying to frame the history, especially of the United States, into a way that people can see what has led to some of the things like housing and economic and educational parity of whites versus non-whites in the United States, especially regarding Native Americans and African Americans post-bellum South. I mean, the Native Americans were already almost completely eradicated by that point, and then African Americans were property until 1865. So you have not a theory that's saying some crazy off-the-wall idea. You're saying that the laws that were being made up until 1865 literally were allowing you to own people as property, and the laws that came after that didn't fix everything, like Jim Crow laws, where you have segregation in schools and segregation on buses and segregation at water fountains and that kind of thing. Like, that's obviously not a fix. And all critical race theory seems to be doing is pointing out that when you're oppressed and there is a clear oppressor, in this case, in the antebellum South, the white people who had all power, especially white men, because they had all the voting power. They owned black people as property, and women didn't have a right to vote. So it was literally white property owners. That it seems that the people that follow thereafter in their footsteps, even when doing things like making slavery illegal, are still making laws that are intentional and intentionally oppressing people of color, or, et cetera. It's not saying that that's history in a nutshell. It's just pointing out the fact that, like, hey, by the way, the reason that inner city black kids are at an educational disadvantage compared to like rural white Americans is partially in part to the fact that their ancestors were slaves. So they started with no income and just bare housing and no education because their slave owners wouldn't allow anything like that. They just wanted manual labor. And since then, they've essentially had an all uphill battle. I mean, I don't think anyone could disagree with the logic that follows there. I mean, at least on principle, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, just to respond to that real quick. Again, I reiterate my support more for a teaching model that kind of takes a more holistic approach to history rather than adopting one particular theory, and kind of looks at the good and the bad, puts it all together, and empowers us to build a bigger and better America.
But like, I mean, but at points when CRT becomes relevant, like, we should talk about it then, right? Like, if we're talking about some racial homogenous society, I don't know, like Japan, which is like almost 99% Japanese, right? Like, so critical race theory really wouldn't come in the factor, right? But like with U.S. history is very different. You know what I mean? So I don't.
You could also look at Korea. You could also look at Vietnam. You could look at many places that China has overtaken, many places that England has overtaken in history. I mean, India, for example, is a prime choice. I mean, you don't think that critical race theory, where you literally have people being enslaved, turned into a giant oppressed minority compared to a overwhelming military and government power, forcing people to live a certain way and be in a certain economic stance compared to, quote unquote, the wealthy, if you will. You don't think that's a at least decent way to describe the actual events that happened?
Unless it's in an academic framework, the debate example I mentioned earlier, no, because I think it is connected to this idea where it's more about power, and it's more about how one disadvantaged group can achieve power, connected to the whole oppressor versus oppressed dialectic. I think it avoids nuance, and so that's why I wouldn't be in favor of it.
So like hierarchical society, specifically, like slave owner versus slave, you don't think that would be an appropriate topic in history to discuss when you're talking about the antebellum South?
I do think that would be an appropriate topic to discuss, but not through the lens of critical race theory specifically. I think you can do that.
What specifically about critical race theory do you oppose when it comes to like the antebellum South and what you would be teaching on the subject?
The oppressor versus oppressed dynamic as a way of viewing history as a whole.
But we're not looking at history as a whole. We're looking at the antebellum South. That's what I'm saying. And the antebellum South, we're looking at slavery in the United States, specifically pre-1865. What in critical race theory specifically do you oppose?
So I oppose the dichotomy of painting everything through America as a deeply systemically racist country, and the oppressor versus oppressed dynamic is kind of what defines everything. In the context of the antebellum South, I do believe that the slave owner versus slave relationship should be discussed, but not through an academic framework that results in people, viewing everything through what I just mentioned.
So this is why I asked, did you read like the basic thesis of critical race theory? So if I can, the Encyclopedia Britannica gives a pretty succinct definition of what it is. And I would say that if you disagree with any point of this, you're free to kind of go into and correct. But it defines critical race theory as an intellectual and social movement, loosely organized framework of legal analysis based on the premise that race is not a natural, biologically grounded feature of physically distinct subgroups of human beings, but a socially constructed category that was used to express and exploit people of color. Do you disagree with anything in that sentence or statement?
I do disagree with some elements in that statement. For example, the idea that race is purely a social construct based on their skills. God, I think there's a place for Black people, Asian people, for a class, white people, all examining some of those issues within the role that he appointed, and for them, and I think that results during that time, and that results in diversity. South, but
wait, hang on. Do you disagree that like Black people, white people, Asians, etc., are not all part of the human race?
Sure. Okay.
Stance on this? Am I understanding that correct?
I'm not sure why.
Oh, of course. I absolutely agree that all of those people are part of the human race.
Okay, then like that is race, right? That is what the race is, the human race. And what you're discussing is the skin tone of people that are a part of the human race.
How would he teach?
Right.
Unless you think that God specifically made Black people with a purpose, and that purpose was slavery.
No, I don't believe that at all, but I do believe that God created each individuals within each group for a unique purpose, and then that purpose meshes into the broader purpose he has for the collective human race as a whole. I think that there's a unique, specific individual purpose that is connected to the way God made that specific person, and I think that race is a part of that.
Slavery specifically.
Well, again, we talked about race being the difference in the human race and skin tone. So you think skin tone essentially is given to people by God, and those people of a particular skin tone have specific purposes. And it just so happens to coincide that the lighter the skin tone, the better the people.
No,
because that sounds a lot like Nazism.
I don't agree that that the whiter the skin tone, the better the person. I just think that God.
You just think that they have a better place in society because God made them that way, or it just lucked out that it was that way.
No, I don't think that that God gives people a different place in society based on their race.
Because that sounds a lot like Nazism.
Has created people in a specific special way, and that race is a part of that.
Even when doing things like making slavery illegal or diversity. And you think that those races hold specific roles in society? That's what you're saying, or implying at least.
It's just connected to the specific role as an individual that God has for that person, but that they all
but like if everybody has their own individual role, their skin tone doesn't matter, and they're all part of the human race, right? But
it doesn't matter, and it's also connected to God's plan for that particular person, because a person's uniqueness, the color of their skin, it's God created that person with the intention that they would be made a certain way, and that's part of his plan for that individual.
Right. So, I mean, would you say it was God's intention for people of a lighter skin tone that had lacked melanin because they were born further apart from the equator than other people to control and manipulate and enslave people of a darker skin tone? Was that part of God's plan?
No, but I think that there's God's permissive will, and they would be made a certain way, and that's part of his plan for that. I think that we see throughout.
Right. So, I mean, would you say it was God's intention for people of a light
evil things to happen as a part of fulfilling his broader plan? It talks about in Job how God allows both calamity and righteousness to happen.
Well, I mean, he also allows for the Jews to buy slaves from the heathens around them based on their religion. So are you pro support of that as well? I mean, the Bible allows for some pretty strange things.
Yeah, so I'm not pro specifically the act of allowing that, but again, I do believe that God uses evil. He allows calamity to happen for a greater and broader purpose.
So, in the context of the antebellum South, you think that it should be taught in the educational method of, with the lens of Christianity, saying that although this was one of, if not one of, like, if not the worst thing that's ever happened to humanity as far as slavery in general, that we should teach it through the lens of an all-knowing being that has a plan. We're just not fully understanding it here on Earth. Is that is that better than critical race theory, in your opinion?
Oh, absolutely. Earlier in the discussion, we talked about how I feel like the expression of Christian beliefs in the public square is objectively good for society, and how I feel like all groups of people can benefit from these Christian values. But I do think it's ultimately better because, again, I think critical race theory is connected to this class struggle where it's about power. And I feel like Christianity ultimately is about God's plan for salvation and about loving and serving one another as equals. And I feel like that religion, that perspective allows us to believe that, God has a purpose for everyone. And
well, I mean, that sounds like, according to the Bible, that purpose for some people is to become enslaved, because God allows for slavery and tells you how to buy slaves and how long you can own them and how you can treat them and what you can do to them and what happens if you beat them, and how you should be punished for it. So, I mean, the Bible has a lot to say on slavery, and I don't know if we should be picking and choosing when it comes to a document that has so much to say on slavery, and none of it is let the slaves go.
Yeah, so I feel like that just because God allows something to happen does not mean it's his plan or intention in the ultimate grander sense. And so I think
I don't mean to be like a jerk here, but I don't really care what the ultimate grand sense is if it's generational slavery in the process, right? Like, if you were being enslaved by people, I would say you're being undoubtedly oppressed by people. And if your children and grandchildren, etc., were also being oppressed by that same group, that's generational oppression through slavery. Now, that is distinctly mentioned in Exodus 21 and Leviticus. It's throughout the Old Testament. There are rules and regulations that allow for generational slavery. To me, that's clear oppression based on specifically your religion. And it sounds to me like you're almost saying like you're in support of that because God says it's okay and he has a bigger plan. But when I say that people are being oppressed in critical race theory, you're saying it's a whole framework that's mischaracterizing history, even though I'm looking at specific things that are directly related to the antebellum South when we're talking about critical race theory. So a little confused. I mean, I'm completely fine with you accepting the biblical stance on it, but it seems the biblical stance is pro-slavery.
Yeah, so I wouldn't characterize the biblical stance as pro-slavery at all, and I'm totally fine with us having divergent opinions on that, obviously, as I'm sure we have on a bunch of other things. I just, at the end of the day, feel like we as a society, it's going to be better for us if we, and obviously I don't support slavery in any way, shape, or form. I want to be clear on that even though there are passages in the Bible that talk about slavery, I'm not for or condoning or supportive of slavery in any way, shape, or form.
Was God wrong when he was doing it?
Was God around when?
No, was God wrong?
Was God wrong?
Yeah, so he was making law. So he said, like, you may purchase your slaves from the heathen among you. Was God wrong?
No, just because I'm.
Okay. That's going to contradict your other positions, right? Because he said you're not for slavery, but he wasn't wrong when he was doing it. So I mean, do you condone slavery or not?
No, I don't condone slavery.
Just when God does it.
Yeah, me saying that God wasn't wrong is me more or less saying that he used something that I perceive, that I believe is a calamity for a greater purpose long term.
Jesse in the comment, he made a good point. So he says that the most biblical argument for slavery was the most common one used by slave owners. Wouldn't God have foreseen that? Like for instance, like there was passages that I haven't heard you say this today, but we've had apologists come on a show and they would say that they were misinterpreting the Bible to read that it was supporting slavery, even though it wasn't. So, regardless of the case, God knew, him being omniscient, he knew that his book, his word, would be used to justify the enslavement of millions of people. I mean, isn't that kind of like a failure on God's part here?
I think it's a failure more so of the people who took God's word and abused it. And so I feel like, God will hold accountable probably more so than anyone else, the people who take his word and use it for evil purposes
But let's say
and
this.
abusive purposes.
Let's say this. So let's say like you're writing a text, and you write you intend one thing, but you know that the way the words that are written right now, you know that in the future somebody's going to use this to justify slavery. Knowing that, wouldn't you write something else instead? Maybe add like a footnote.
From a human temporal point of view, yes, but ultimately God is sovereign, and like you were saying, he foreknows everything. And he knew ultimately that history had to be just so to achieve the plan he envisioned before the dawn of time that would involve sacrifice through his son and would involve the redemption of humanity. And he uses evil as a part of his plan to fulfill that. And C.S. Lewis talks about this a lot in The Problem of Pain. He talks about how God could not create a world that was perfect and without sin and allow human free will simultaneously to exist at the same time. To create a world that was perfectly without evil and without sin, God would have to essentially eliminate human free will. And he would have
God,
will we get to heaven? Will we have free will?
This is also a different conversation, but
it's
God
naturally
doesn't give people perfect free will. In fact, he takes away people's will in the Bible on multiple occasions. So just wanted to point that out.
But
I'm saying people. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, do we have free will in heaven?
No. We'll have a different will. We'll have a glorified body. We'll have a different mind. And so our time in heaven will be spent basically tending to whatever role that we have, that God has, it's partly going to be a reflection of the role we had here on earth. It talks about how we're going to have a special name that's known only to us.
Nice. So our will no longer becomes our own. Like its work is controlled by God.
Would you say it's akin? If we were to go to heaven? Would you say it's akin to the will of the angels? Is it like what the will of the angels have?
Yeah, I would say it's similar. We're completely spiritually reborn beings. We won't be fleshly beings at all. We'll have a glorified body. All the disease that we ever could have, all of our physical limitations in that sense will be totally, removed, and will be replaced with a body and a soul our soul does live forever no matter what, but we'll also be replaced with a body that can live forever.
I apologize after the fact for that trap that I just set up, because if that's the case and we have something akin to the angels, we could still potentially sin because Satan or Lucifer, the archangel, had pride and still fell. So it seems that even if you eradicate free will, that sin is possible. So what's the deal there,
I mean, around the time of creation, we had something, we were in this state called morally neutral. And so after the fall, we became morally evil. And Lucifer, he had a desire to rebel against God. And so I believe that
if he didn't have free will because he was an angel like we would have in heaven, then he didn't have any choice but to rebel against God, because God would have made him that way.
Bible does say that he was ultimately predestined to do what he did, so that's possible.
Okay, just clarifying that. I mean, in that case, like when we get to heaven, we could potentially cause another rebellion. It would just be God's plan.
No, because God hasn't. Because again, God created his plan before the dawn of time, and he did predestine Lucifer to be to do everything that he did to become evil and to become Satan, because he was a creation of
And-
God.
And you
so
wouldn't
God,
think that that same applies to all humans when he
Yeah.
says he foreknew and predestined us according to his knowledge to his purpose,
No,
so
I
that
don't,
all
because
things work together for him. I was just finishing the verse. Sorry.
no, that's fine. Do I need to wait a second or?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, that was it. That was it. That was the whole passage. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. I obviously affirm 100% of what that verse says, and I believe that in the same way that Lucifer's fall was a part of God's redemptive plan for everything, I believe his redeeming us and giving us glorified bodies and everything we just talked about is also part of his redemptive plan, and that there's just not going to be even a possibility or an option for us to engage in the same way that Lucifer did, to behave that way, because we've been predestined not to act that way when we.
And it wouldn't be possible for us to eradicate that down, like his plan that was written before the beginning of time.
No, because God is
And
sovereign. He's omniscient, and
yeah, and it's not possible to like remove our names from the book of life or get our name added into the book of life. Is that correct?
correct. It's not possible for us as human beings to alter or change what God has done. I'll admit, I've become more reformed, more, call it Calvinist, call
You
it
see where
whatever.
I'm going with this?
Yeah.
You see where I'm going with this, James?
I used to be much more Arminian, more, it's all about free will, but now I believe that, to be human is to be so totally depraved that the only way we can be redeemed is by God acting first and beginning that process. And then we do have free will, but it's in the context of that.
It's by no means free will, right? Because God must first act and move upon the hearts to stir them by the Holy Spirit, and then by that movement, he is then set forth into motion his ultimate will, which is predestination. So, I mean, even if you grant things like libertarian free will and you eradicate like the eternal free will aspect of it, or vice versa, it seems that at least in the most important aspect of Christianity, where it counts, you don't have free will.
Correct. The free will, if it comes into context at all, is only in our response to what God is doing. But then again, that's already been predetermined, because God knows exactly what's going to happen. As you mentioned, Romans 8:28, for those he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his son, etc.
It was
Cool. I'm out of topics and questions,
Well,
but you can continue on as long as both of you'd like.
Sure. I was gonna ask about. So you had said that it was impossible for God to have free will and not have evil, right?
I would rephrase that in saying that it's impossible for us to have free will. It's totally possible for God to have as much free will as he wants, because he's God.
Okay. All right. All right. I thought he had said something earlier, like we have free will on Earth, and the reason why there's evil is because there's free will. God allowed it, and he couldn't allow free will without there being evil or suffering or whatever. Right now.
Yes, that's right.
So but my understanding is that's through the fall of man, they learned the knowledge of good and evil by eating the fruit. I don't see why God couldn't just not put the tree there in the first place. Because did they have free will prior to eating the fruit?
Ultimately, no, because God foreknew that they were ultimately going to do that, and that the fall was going to come about that way. And so God sovereignly allowed that to happen, facilitated that as a part of his redemptive plan for history. And one of the beautiful things about the Christian faith is that it is a mystery, and that it transcends understanding, and it confounds us. And, sometimes it hurts my brain just thinking about things like eternity. But ultimately, I believe it's at times not rational. At times it goes beyond that. But it's just believing that God did everything that he did ultimately for the redemptive plan of humanity.
So to pivot a little bit, you had talked about Romans 13 earlier, and so ironic that you brought up this passage. Believe it or not, this is Romans 13 is the passage that led me to no longer be a Christian. I became an atheist about a week after just dealing with this. But
Hmm.
it seems like in Romans 13 that any form of government is endorsed by God. Right? It says that there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Right? That's verse 1 in Romans 13. So like this would include any government that exists. North Korea, Nazi Germany. Like how is that promoting any sort of anything that resembles the idea that we have of when we talk about Judeo-Christian government, where its only role is to protect our rights? Because you have most governments don't do that. Most governments are very oppressive. It's been that way throughout history, and it's that way now. And it seems like God is endorsing all of them. So how could you look at the early United States and also look at the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, i.e., North Korea, and then say America endorsed by God, North Korea not?
Yeah, I don't think you can say that God endorses one government and then doesn't endorse another. I think I go back to the problem of pain example, to where God sovereignly allows evil to fulfill his plan. And the honest answer is that I don't have an answer as to why God has allowed the communist government of North Korea to exist.
I'm not even saying like not even allow them. So when we're talking about government, how it should operate, we're talking about there were certain principles, Judeo-Christian principles that we were pulling from the Bible, and the way when I look at Romans 13, it seems to be that the principles could go either way. It could go in the United States, or it could go towards North Korea. Like I'm not asking why does God allow it to exist. I'm saying the Bible seems to endorse it. So what would the principles be that we're extrapolating that we think supports, a limited government that just secure people's rights?
I think that the role of government is to punish evil and to reward good. And I think that because of what we were discussing earlier about the problem of pain and free will and all that,
Mm-hmm.
I think that people do have the ability to abuse that biblical role of governing, and not
True.
to conform people's rights, and not to go ahead.
But where are you pulling these biblical views of government? Like for instance, like you said that the role of government is to secure people's rights. Okay, and I can agree with that. But where do you pull that from in the Bible? How does the Bible say what you're saying?
In Romans 13, where a lot of times we don't see specific guidance like letter for letter in the Bible, like
Hmm.
for example on marriage.
Yeah,
We don't see.
I don't. It doesn't have to be like I'm not expecting like a verbatim sentence in here. But
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just saying a general principle. Like when I look at from Romans 13 verses 1 through 6, and then after that it starts talking about Mosaic law. But I look at that. I don't see where it's endorsing any specific role in government. It just seems to be whatever it does, however the government operates, you have to obey it. You see
For
what I'm saying
me,
here?
yes, I do. But for me, the read that I have on that passage is the one in authority is God's servant for your good. And so for me, a part of that, even though it's not mentioned specifically, is confirming and standing by human rights, and not abusing that and trying to take that away, even though it's not specifically defined in the text.
Hmm.
That you take that passage and then you build a framework, you build a worldview around that passage. And a part of that framework and a worldview, and that worldview is providing a government that fights for the oppressed and fights for people who are hurting and who are destitute and who cannot speak for themselves. That's also where I get my views on abortion and on life, because I feel like the unborn are people who can't speak for themselves, and then other people who are poor and in poverty, and other people who cannot speak up for themselves, people who are in prison, etc.
But okay, but now, when we look at governments that were like theocracies, like being ruled by God Himself, God he was legislating laws out to people and giving orders about how the military should operate. He wasn't doing the things that you were supporting. You know what I mean? So it seems like you and I are more in agreement here than we are with God. You know what I mean? Because you wouldn't say like a good way for, like, for instance, right now, we were Iraq, right? When we were there, right? Whether it's good or bad, right? Where you agree with the weapons of mass destruction, all that kind of stuff. But you would say it would have been immoral for us to go into Iraq and just wipe out the entire country, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Okay. So now we have in a Bible of God commanding just that.
The reason why I don't believe that it was immoral for God to do that is because it was on behalf of his chosen people. And that ultimately led to the line of David and the redemption of his people through Jesus Christ. And he allowed calamity and he allowed evil to happen. And as humans, we don't have that foresight. We don't have that ability to engineer a grand plan for the universe the way God does. And so in my human capacity, in our human capacity, I would say that wiping out a country would be wrong, but from my point of view.
Do you not see how it's problematic? Like for me, like I'm looking at this, someone with a great interest in how government ought to run, who went to grad school, got a master's in public policy. I'm well read in political philosophy. I loved all this stuff. Like you go look at my library, and I'm reading this, and I see things about how civilians ought to be treated in war in the Bible. And the only thing that I see is God commanding them to wipe out everybody. And I never see where it says it was wrong. And never even give the caveats that you gave, saying that it was only okay in the circumstances because it came strictly from God. But otherwise, it would be wrong. Like it never gives that caveat.
Mm-hmm. For me, I look at how everything ultimately led up to Christ. Everything that happened and the way God allowed the people of Israel to act, all of the prophets, all of the the prostitutes and the spies with Rahab, and everything leading up to David, and ultimately the line that led to Christ. Everything had a plan and a purpose. And to me, that's the beauty of my Christian faith, is it is a mystery. I don't understand it all. I don't have a rational explanation for it all, but it transcends everything in my life. And, it gives me purpose. And the beauty of it is not understanding it all. I just know that God's plan ultimately is leading to something greater and more beautiful than anything we can comprehend. And I do think the problem of pain what C.S. Lewis wrote in that book, it does make a lot of sense in the context of what we're talking about.
So, let's say I'm in a position of great power. Let's say I'm the president or something like that, and I'm reading the Bible, and I'm trying to do what I think is within the parameters of God's rules, and I see, okay, cool. In this instance, God commanded them to wipe out everybody. That's how he was treating like everybody in the land of Canaan, right? And so I extrapolate from there that genocide during wartime is now okay. How would you convince me that I'm wrong using the Bible?
Context is key. Reading any book of literature, or even viewing a film today, or a play, examining any work and examining truth requires context.
So the context is Israel's waging war on people, and God tells them, after you win the war, kill everybody. That is the context. And now I'm the president. I'm waging war on people, and I'm thinking, what should I do with the civilians afterwards? That's the context.
Well, I think that we should read the Old Testament in the context of the New Testament, and realizing how the moment in which everything went from the Old Testament to the New Testament is when Christ came, gave his life for us, and now there's there's a fulfillment of the old framework, but there's a continuation of the New Testament framework. And I think an understanding of that would tell us that it's not God's will for us to massacre and murder all.
So now, so you say like it goes from the Old Testament to the New Testament. So I know that the last thing that was ever said about genocide was that it's approved, right? Because they did it. And then I go to the New Testament. I come to Romans 13, and it says all the authorities that exist have been established by God. I'm an authority. I'm established by God, and now I'm doing this, right?
I would argue that genocide isn't approved. It happened, and God allowed it.
And where did you get that from in the Bible? What principle? Because when genocide is approached, it seems to be on that side. It seems to be on the side of genocide.
I think just no worries at all. I think just an understanding of God's redemptive purposes tell us that genocide is totally out of step with his character, and that even though that was allowed, it was in the context of God's chosen people, Israel, and that in any other circumstance, God is adamantly opposed to genocide, and it's a moral evil.
Where would you see that God is adamantly opposed to genocide? Because in all the instances where this question was pondered, it was in favor of genocide. In fact, he punished somebody. He removed him from king for not committing genocide. We talk about Saul.
So Romans 13, for me, makes me believe that God is not in favor of genocide at all, because it says that the role of government is to punish evil and to reward good. Mm-hmm. From everything that I know about Scripture and the framework that I've been led to believe, promoting genocide is not promoting the good. Promoting genocide would be promoting evil. And so for me, just that framework that I have built basically from Romans 13, it's not my framework, it's a biblical framework, would tell me that a government that's promoting good does not condone genocide at all. And so for me, that is where the context that would come from. It doesn't come from necessarily what was written at that time, but it comes from the overarching theme of redemption that we have in Scripture.
So now, let's say I'm back in that time period, and God has told Israel to commit genocide on those people, and that's what they're doing. And I go in, I try to stop it. Am I stopping an evil by stopping this genocide?
So I feel like in any other circumstance, the answer would be yes. But in that particular circumstance, for whatever reason, God allowing that to happen in that situation, the person doing it would be opposing God's plan. And again, it's there are some passages
God's
in the Bible
that
are
being genocide
in the context of that particular situation.
Okay.
There are some passages of the Bible that are really difficult to parse at times, and that are difficult to square away with other parts of the Bible, particularly some Old Testament versus New Testament situations. But that's the beauty of it, not the genocide itself, but the beauty of it is that the Bible is sometimes Jesus says in the new or not Jesus himself, but there's a line in one of the New Testament Gospels that says, "This is a hard teaching. Can anyone accept it?" And then I forget what Christ says next, but it's just, for me, that's part of the beauty of it, is that I don't understand it all, and that it's part of that, I know that God has a plan, and that it transcends what my imagination can comprehend.
There's a comment that kind of, I won't say the comment verbatim, but it made me think about something. And so like you said, like in the context of them being God's chosen people, it was okay. So Israel, are they still God's chosen people to you? Or like, so you're reformed now and you think it's a church? Or
I think it's those who are in Christ, and I think that God has a special.
So the church, so those who are in Christ. So let's say there's a Christian president and he's wiping out people. You'd be okay with that?
No, I'm not okay with wiping people out under any circumstance. And with the Old
Well, I'm
Testament
sorry.
example,
Yeah, that you already said you're opposed to it, but I guess it would seem like the Bible would be opposed to it, right?
yes,
I mean, sorry.
I would.
Actually, I meant the opposite of what I just said. It seems like the Bible wouldn't be opposed to it, right? Because he's in Christ. He's part of the chosen, right?
I would say that the Bible would be opposed to any effort to wipe anybody out unless the preserving the church required it for some reason. And I believe that is what happened in the Old Testament, where preserving God's plan for the people of Israel, God's chosen people, in that context, required the action that he took. But outside of God mandating something, that would be my view on it.
What about I presume you're opposed to Israel's treatment of the Palestinians as well?
Yeah, I think that there are heroes and villains on both sides of that conflict. I do believe that Israel has a right to defend themselves. I'm not in favor of any type of situation where people are mistreated. I do think that Israel has a just reason for engaging in this war, given that.
But Israel wouldn't be moral for completely wiping out the Palestinians, or even their reckless handling of life. I'm saying like destroying hospitals and stuff because.
Correct.
Just
Correct.
It
would. Correct. It would be wrong for Israel to wipe out the Palestinians, to destroy hospitals, and to mistreat them in any way outside of what's necessary to, prevent in terms of the direct military engagement. Tragically, in war, I'm personally more libertarian when it comes to that issue, but there's always going to be unfortunate not counter effects. There's always going to be innocent casualties in war, and it's tragic. And so I hope the war ends soon, and that both sides can come to an agreement. But yeah, wiping them out, absolutely wrong for sure.
Unless we're talking about ancient Israel or God's doing it.
And in the context of that situation, again, it's part of that overarching story of redemption and God allowing evil to achieve a purpose, which I don't fully know or understand.
Okay. All right. Oh, well, man, I appreciate you coming on. We're past time, but man, I enjoyed the conversation, man. Did you want to shout out any websites or any organizations you want to let people know about?
Yeah, so you guys mentioned the Heritage Foundation. I think that for Project 2025, they're a great resource. And for my work at the Standing for Freedom Center, our website has a bunch of great articles. The article that I wrote that refers to a lot of the Christian inspiration for America in regards to our discussions on the separation of church and state issue, that's further down, so I might send you the story on Facebook and a message or something. But our website has a lot of great resources for stuff that we're doing. But thank you so much for having me on the show, Joshua. I really enjoyed the discussion. This is actually the first show of any kind I've been asked to be on, so this conversation will always hold a special place for me.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming on, bro.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. James, thank you, man. I appreciate you coming on. Just wanted to shout out and say thanks. You were quite eloquent, and I appreciate you taking the feedback and giving it your all and just having that good discussion. I think it went well. So I really want to thank you for coming on and discussing this with us. And just wanted to say, just big thanks, man.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be. It was a pleasure to be on, and wishing you guys a great rest of the week, and hope you succeed in all your endeavors and the rest of the show goes well.
Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, have a good night. Bye.
All right, bro. For next week, we don't have a guest yet, but
I thought we had something scheduled.
Did we?
I saw something on the schedule.
Let me pull this up real quick. Let's see. Nah, I don't see anything.
Let me look at.
So we got the Prophecy of Tears.
Prophecy. That's the 10th.
Yes, the 10th. No, that's September.
That's
10th.
next week.
That's September 10th.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a whole month from the 10th.
Yeah, so we're gonna have Liam from South Africa. He'll be back on. He's gonna be discussing Ezekiel 26. He thinks he has the answer. He does not, but
Spoiler alert.
yeah, well, because I already see what his answer was. He sent me the WhatsApp message about the explanation.
Alexander the Great.
Yeah,
Nailed it. I don't even need to look.
yeah, it doesn't work. We'll explain that later. Jesse says, get him back on. Yeah, we plan to, man. James was a good dude. I enjoyed the conversation. Very honest conversation. So
I genuinely respect the heck out of the honesty at the end, where he's like, "I don't have the answer." I mean, I much prefer that than to make up something.
yeah. So yeah, man. Yep. I don't have any more announcements other than we don't have a guest next week. We might find a reaction video, and while doing that reaction video, maybe we'll do the Phantom X said something about doing like an open chat or whatever with people.
Open forum. Yeah. So if we go that route, just a heads up, I think the best method is for everyone watching and for anyone that might be interested, and anywhere that we can post it or anywhere that our viewers would like to post it, is we'll create a link and it will be open during that window, and then we can basically just give you a code to get in.
Yeah.
And it won't cost anyone anything to join. Hopefully my house computer or internet next week, I will be back hosting and on decent internet, so I can be showrunner again. But I do appreciate AAA stepping in while I'm living in a hotel for the last month. And then we're more than welcome to that idea. I told Phantom that we would probably discuss it off camera a little bit, but if it's something that you guys are interested in, or if you think that you could send it to people that might want to just hop in, and they don't have to stay on the whole time, but they're more than welcome to, and just kind of chat with us and ask our opinions on life or whatever else. We're more than welcome to the idea, and we can do that. It's really easy to set up. So, but yeah, without, I think that's about the end of what I had. Other than I'm glad I'm no longer at the hotel. Well, I won't be at the hotel hopefully next week by this time. So
Cool. All right, guys. I'm signing out.